In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings that you have given all of us. We also thank you for our freedoms you have given us and the ability to gather together this evening for this meeting. We pray for the protection of all those that lead us and pray that they will do your will and not their will. That our leaders may follow the Constitution and our laws as our founders intended. We pray that all wars may end and that you will assist those who have been victims of war and crimes against them. We pray also tonight for our speaker that he may enlighten us with the information that may benefit our health and that we will pass the information along to others. We also want to pray for all those that are sick and who cannot be with us tonight, especially Dave Kramer and for Cheryl Kramer. And last, Lord, we realize that we cannot make America great again until we first make America holy again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. All right, before I begin, at the end of the table, I have some coupons, $5 off, $10 purchase or more, okay, available for you folks. I also we have some events coming up. We have Earth Day prizes special coming up on the 22nd to the 24th, so different price discounts at the store. I also have what we call a health hotline. It's our monthly publication on what we have at the store throughout the month. Some great health articles in there as well. And then there's another little flyer that talks about an egg hunt. So if you got kids who want to hunt for golden eggs,
Testing.
there are some prizes.
Testing.
So I got a question for you folks. Why did you form this organization? Yeah, well, because we got battles, right? We got battles in front of us. Some big ones, all right? And they're not going away unless we put up a heck of a fight. And tonight's presentation is, I think, one of the very most important fights we're in for. It's our food supply, right? I don't know if you know anything about what's put out there in terms of what's in the grocery stores. There's 10,000 different chemicals that could be in those foods, right? Literally thousands of them. And about 1% have actually been tested by the FDA for safety. It's pretty devastating. But what I'm going to talk about is from a more fundamental level, even at the foundational level, okay? Now, I handed out a couple little packets, artificial sweetener packets. You folks want to, let's start with, I forget your name, I'm sorry. Gavin. Read the ingredients out loud. Dextrose. Okay, 1 second. This is a 0-calorie sweetener, right? Keep that in mind.
Cream of tartar and calcium silicate.
So what was the first ingredient?
Dextrose.
Dextrose. How about yours?
Dextrose with
Testing.
Maltodextrin?
aspartame,
Aspartame, okay.
Testing.
and potassium.
And I had one more.
Dextrose, maltodextrin, and sucralose.
Okay, so we have 3 products with artificial sweeteners. The number one ingredient of each of those products is real sugar. Right? We're told it's a 0-calorie sweetener, but yet its number one ingredient is real sugar. The number 2 ingredient on a couple of those is maltodextrin, which actually spikes blood sugar higher than regular sugar does. All right, so the point of this is we're being deceived on a lot of levels. A lot of levels, right?
Testing.
So before I go any further, I got to satisfy the lawyers. All right? This is not intended to diagnose, treat, or mitigate any disease. All right? Dietary supplements and foods can interact with prescription medications. If you are taking a prescription medication, become informed about the possible interactions. There, I got that out of the way. Any lawyers in the house? All right, Natural Grocers has been around since 1955. All right, been around for a long time. And the number one foundational principle is nutrition education. All right. And if you read down the list here, highest quality standards in the industry, and I'm talking about the grocery industry, highest quality standards it is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit further. All right. Everyday affordable pricing, supporting local communities, that's what I'm doing tonight, supporting and providing information to the community. I think that's very important. Learn about what's happening in our food supply, right? And we get a lot of great employees. Our food supply system is broken, right? And like I said, it starts at that foundational level on how that food is even grown out of the ground. All right, you look at our farm. Now, this is not an indictment on any farmers in here. I know how hard you guys work. I worked on a farm for a while when I was a teenager. I know what goes into that. You guys work your tail off 365 days a year, right? I mean, you have passion for what you do, and you're the jack of all trades. Farming is not easy life, right? I get it. So this is not an indictment on anybody here that's a farmer, on any farmers whatsoever. But you look at our system, right? You look at the things that our farmers have to do, right? The inputs that they need to put into that soil, the methods of growing, right? Now, of course, GMOs are becoming an issue. You know, there's a lot of things that they have to do in order to make a dollar, right? And it's having a significant impact on our health, on our environment, and on the economy in many ways, right? The warning signs are all around us. Environmental health. We're seeing a decline in the biodiversity. All right, what do we mean by that? I'm talking about bugs and other animal life, right? Water systems, we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. We're seeing an impact on that soil. That's the foundation. That soil health is foundation. We're going to dig into that a little further. All right. Also, other ecosystems, the polluted water, whatnot. Now, this is all having a direct impact on that environment out there. It's also having an impact on our health in significant ways. All right, very important. And again, like I said, there's some economic issues also that have arisen due to our system of growing food. All right. Some of you probably identify with this. It all started back in the 40s, right, when the Green Revolution, chemical inputs after the World War II, you know, utilization of chemical inputs. And what was the initiative behind all that? Growing as much food as possible, right? As quickly as possible, right? Using those kind of inputs to have that turnaround as fast as possible, right? Growing as much food as we can, all right? Quickly. And one of the most devastating impacts of all this, when you look at that Green Revolution, you know, you look at farm specialization, monocropping, mechanization, again, chemical inputs. What are those chemical inputs all about? To try to fertilize that soil with what? Anybody can tell me what the three main ingredients are in fertilizer? Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Three ingredients that are put into that soil to help those plants. Well, wait a minute, where's the magnesium? Where's the zinc? Where's the boron? All those other trace minerals that our body needs, right? Those plants need to produce a lot of nutrients. And it's not going to get it from just three, right? In fact, they've identified about 10,000 different nutrients in plants. Now, the human body needs about 90 that they know of, that they agree that we need. There are some nutrients that we do get a benefit from, but aren't necessarily recognized by the RDA as being necessary for human life. Right? An example, anybody hear of lutein? Yeah? It's not recognized as an essential nutrient, so there's no RDA standard for it, but we get a benefit from it. There's a lot of nutrients we get benefits from that they don't have established as an RDA. Okay? So anyway, we're not putting back in the soil what those plants need to maximize their benefit, right? So that's important to consideration. There's been 190 million tons in 2022 of a synthetic fertilizer put on the ground in America. 190 million tons. It's quite a bit. All right, so what's it doing to our water supply? All right, you think about that runoff into our streams. I'm an avid paddler. I paddle a lot up and down Catfish Creek. And there's been several years where I'll paddle in the spring. I'll find 30, 40 fish belly up in that stream. All right, why are they belly up? Because of the farm runoff, right? Killing off those species. Now imagine for a second, that's just one stream coming out of Dubuque County. Imagine 30 states feeding that Mississippi River, right? And all that flowing downstream. All right. It has a significant impact on the Gulf of America, right? Right? Significant impact on that. In fact, it's so devastating that it produces what's called a dead zone, almost 6,000 square miles worth. It creates an algae plume that's so big that nothing can live underneath that algae plume. All right, so you got that devastation of the life that lives in there. Now you got economic impact, right? You got fisheries and you got tourism, that all that's impacted by that devastation every spring in that area. Yeah, just think about it for a little bit. I wouldn't want to go swimming in that water, right? If I was a tourist going to that area, it's a beautiful area, right? Corpus Christi and whatnot. I mean, and then again, the economics of those fisheries and other, economics that in that area, right? So it's devastating. I remember reading this was a while back. At one time, there was only about 140 of these dead zones across the world. Now there's over 500 of them. Every spring you get this runoff from that inputs, right? And just, like I said, it's devastating to our water supply, all right? By the way, one of my notes here, put this in perspective. In 2020, a study detected up to 35 different pesticides in our southern streams. 35 different pesticides. All right. Quite a few. Now, the thing is, it's not just devastation for that ecosystem, that water. What about our insects? I know a lot of people don't like insects. I get it. All right? But think about the ecology of insects and what they do. Right? Now, is it that we're killing off the insects due to these pesticides and these chemical inputs? Or are we killing off what they eat? Or maybe it's both. What I mean by that, what's happening with the microbiome, right, in the soil. Anybody understand what I mean by microbiome? What about the bacteria life and the fungi life, right? And then you got those insects and what eats insects. Now you got a potential ecology up and down this whole entire, system, right? So they've done studies where they actually measure the amount of insects collected on license plates. Kind of interesting. They've been doing this over years. So they count how many bugs have been splattered on those plates, and it's getting less and less and less and less. Right? So that's how they know this. Right? So again, what's the collateral damage? All right, think about all the life that is, gets benefit from those insects in the microbiome of the soil, the microorganisms, the fungi. You know what I mean by the fungi? Anybody knows what fungi is? Anybody? Mushrooms. All right. Do you know that 92% of that plant life out there relies on the mushroom network in the soil? That mushroom network, it's what's called the mycelium, right? Mycelium network. It's this micro, network. It's like a root system of mushrooms, all right, that's underground. And every time you walk out there in the grass across your lawn or whatever you're walking on, mycelium network. All right? Now think about the chemical inputs being put on that. And then the excessive tilling, right, that wipes that out every year after year after year. Okay? Very important environment for that plant life and for the nutritional value of the food that's being grown. Okay, and again, think about all those other insects that are impacted by this, the collateral damage. Everybody knows that we need bees, right? A full 1/3 of our food supply is required to have some pollination. All right, so every 1/3 of that food that's being produced needs some kind of pollinator, Bees, other insects, birds, they all help in that pollination process. All right? How many have heard of the bee apocalypse? The wiping out of the bee populations. Pretty significant. A lot of people don't realize how important that is. Again, a full 1/3 of our food supply. Right? Pretty significant. And again, you think about the collateral damage that's occurring from that loss of life up and down the ecology, other animals that rely on that. Okay? So, again, like I said, we're destroying the soil. Excessive tilling, back to what I said about wiping out that mycelium network year after year, monocropping, growing the same thing year after year after year. Okay? And I think it's been said, and some of you farmers could probably verify this, that we only have about, 50 years left on our soil for growing of. Has anybody ever heard that? I think the UN did a study. All right, and they say that we only have about 50 years of good quality soil for growing of food. Pretty significant. What about our children and their children's children? Right? Also, you look at the chemical inputs, and anybody here have a CAFO? Confinement animal feeding operation. All right. And like I said, this is not an indictment on any farmer here. This is just the way it is. It's a system that we're in, right? But there are things you can do. Anybody here heard of the Rodale Institute? Anybody know of the Rodale Institute? Organization that helps farmers make a transition from current methods into regenerative organic farming. All right, and they're seeing some great changes occur. They actually have an office in Iowa. All right, and we're seeing some great changes occur with that efforts to help farmers become regenerative organic and make the same, if not more, money than they ever have. Because the economics of farming, the amount of required inputs year after year keeps growing and growing, right? Again, to maintain that yield, right? Economics of that yield. So more and more inputs have to happen, all right? All right, one of the things, and I know somebody talked about CO2. I'm not an advocate on the climate change BS, right? I think the climate change is happening from what shit they're spraying in the sky, right? You know, that's a concern, all right? I'm with you on that. But I am an advocate for CO2 sequestration into the soil. And we'll talk about why that is here in a little bit. That ground needs CO2, okay? And the way our current agricultural methods are, we're minimizing because of how that soil is. It's becoming dirt. It can't sequester as much carbon dioxide into it because it doesn't have as much organic matter in it. That's why CO2 sequestration is important in the soil. I don't care about the climate change stuff. There's other reasons why CO2 is important for that sequestration, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right? Poor soil health equals poor human health. All right? Why is that? All right? Well, our food's containing a lot less in nutrients. Right? Up to 38% less in protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin. That's a B vitamin, by the way. Vitamin C. All right? A lot of nutrients. And like I said earlier, all right, you think about the chemical inputs. In essence, what a lot of those chemical inputs do is they make plants lazy. Okay, I'll give you a good example. Anybody here ever hear of resveratrol? Okay, a chemical produced in the skin of grapes. When I was working at McGraw-Hill Publishing and it first came out, this kind of discovery about resveratrol, they found that it has a similar benefit to us as exercise. And there was an email going around at McGraw-Hill, and a lot of the ladies liked it. We don't even need to exercise. We can just drink wine. Right? And I had to burst their bubble. I said, well, you need to drink about a barrel of wine to get any significant amount of resveratrol. And of course, there were a couple of them that said, that's okay. But I bursted their bubble again, back to what I said about plants being lazy. Resveratrol is produced in the grape in the presence of fungus. So what happens when you put an antifungal on it? No resveratrol. Right? So plants produce nutrients, a lot of them for their own protection. And some of these confer benefits to us, like antioxidants. What's an antioxidant? Anybody?
From aging.
What's that?
Keeps you from aging.
Yeah, well, and it does so by helping prevent inflammation. In fact, it's a good word for it, inflammaging. Right? Everybody knows what a free radical is? You ever hear of a free radical? You ever hear of free radical scavenging? Okay, free radical is a molecule that's imbalanced, right? And it wants to get balanced. So what does it do? It sets up an oxidative reaction and steals an electron from another molecule, setting up this chain reaction of oxidation, right? From one to the next, starting this cascade of inflammation, right? What do antioxidants do? They step in and stop that. Right? That's why they're called antioxidants. Right? So what I'm getting at is there's a lot of nutrients in plants that get sacrificed due to a lot of our efforts, our farming efforts. Poor health. And we're all seeing that decline in poor health, right? We're seeing it. Right? 25% of our kids have fatty liver. When we were kids, did you know anybody that had fatty liver disease other than maybe, an alcoholic? All right, that's why they call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. All right, why are we 25% of our kids? I mean, it's devastating. I mean, think about the consequences of that. They're all going to be diabetic, all right? They're all going to have major health issues down the line unless we put a stop to some of this stuff, right? Our fertility rates are dropping, right? America's one of the worst in industrialized nations with our fertility rates. right? One of the worst. ADHD. Right? How many people do you know have ADHD? Have you ever, a lot of kids. Okay? So imagine for a second that my arm is a nerve. Okay? And on the end of my nerve, we have dendrites. So that nerve signal goes down the nerve and off the dendrites onto other nerves, sending the signal. Okay? Crossing that gap. Okay? That chemical that jumps across is called acetylcholine. Now we have another chemical that stops it. All right? It's called acetylcholine esterase. We need to stop that signal. We can't have it keep firing, right? We want to stop it. It's purposely made to stop the signal. All right? Pesticides produce what's called organophosphates that actually block the blocker. So the signals keep firing. All right? So one of the reasons why we have a lot of people with ADHD is because they can't shut things off. All right? They're overthinking. It's just inability to shut things off. Now, there's been some recent studies showing that, hey, if we get these people on a organic-based diet, minimize the pesticides, that ADHD gradually goes away. Okay? We see some major improvements there. All right? And then, you look at some of the adult situations, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. All right? We know that cancer rates are on the rise. All right? And glyphosate is a major contributor to some of this stuff. Everybody knows what glyphosate is? All right? Main ingredient of Roundup. Okay? And one of the most significant detrimental effects of glyphosate, it is a registered antibiotic. Now think about your microbiome in your intestinal tract. Right? Think about trillions of living bacteria in there that perform a lot of important functions. Right? Now, the research on the microbiome is kind of in its infancy. They know that there are some strains that support mental health. There are strains that support weight management. There are strains that support athleticism. They're finding all these different strains that perform different functions. It's pretty amazing. Right? There's actually an experiment where they had rats, and they had two groups of rats, and one group of rats were fat, purposely made obese, all right, and the other group was healthy. I know this sounds kind of disgusting, but I'm going to say it anyway. They did a fecal matter transplant. Okay? Took the microbiome and switched them. Guess what happened to the rats? These rats became healthy. These rats became fat. Due to the microbiome. Okay, the intestinal tract. And if we're constantly hitting it with a chemical that's messing up that microbiome, with every forkful, right, our intestinal tract microbiome, I see it every day, somebody coming in the store looking for intestinal tract support. All right, every day. All right, what's going on with my gut? All right, and if anybody doubts the impact of glyphosate, I suggest you read this book, Toxic Legacy, done by Dr. Seneff, MIT research scientist, did a deep dive into glyphosate and looked at all the negative impacts of it. All right, pretty devastating. There's a lot of issues with glyphosate.
Is she still alive?
Yeah, good question. Is she still alive? Yes, Dr. Stephanie Seneff is still alive. All right, but she goes through a lot of things. Again, destroying our health. All right. And it's a shame that there has to be a private organization that does this, all right? The Environmental Working Group, non-for-profit organization that actually pulls produce off the shelf and tests it for pesticide residues, all right? Why doesn't our federal government do that? All right? Anyway, these are what they call the dirty dozen. You can literally take strawberries, squeeze the juice out of them, and use it as a pesticide. Conventional strawberries are terrible. Right? There's so many pesticide residue inside them. You can't wash it off. It's in the plant. Right? Very absorbent fruit. Right? You got apples, number 7. Now, this is 2024. Their new list came out recently, and grapes have moved to number 4, and everything else shifted. So our grapes are actually number 4 on the list. All right, again, pesticides. And you look at that, what it says here about kale, collards, mustard greens, over 100 different pesticides found. And the thing is, again, the federal government doesn't do a lot of testing on this stuff. And they don't do any testing on the synergistic effect. What about the cocktail effect? What if you have multiple pesticides? You know, what's the detrimental effect of a combination of different pesticides on the body? All right? They don't test it. Destroying our economy. Who remembers driving across Iowa 50, 60 years ago and seeing town after town thriving? Right? You had these small little towns. You'd have a lot of people, you know, the farmers and their families, you know, supporting these local communities. All right? My brother used to work for the Chamber of Commerce, and he may have called on some of you folks. This is many years ago. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he told me in 1 year in Iowa, we had 5,000 farms closed down. Family farms. That was just in 1 year. All right? And what happened? They're still growing food on those farms. They've been snatched up by the big corporations, right? A lot of those farms are still operating, but now they're run by big corporations, right? So these small communities out here are drying up, becoming ghost towns. All you may have there is a gas station, and that's it, right? Quick Stop or Casey's or whatever, right? So the economics has been devastating. And by the way, 75% of our subsidies go to the top 10 producers, right? How come these small farmers aren't getting their share? How come these smaller operations aren't getting their fair share, right? And organics, you know, farmers that are trying to do good for, you know, the health of that soil and the health of that community, trying to, you know, they're not getting these subsidies, all right? So economically, it's devastating. And again, you think about, like I said earlier, regarding, you know, some of the impact of other communities, like, you know, down at the Gulf of America, right? You got some of the other issues that arise, all right? That collateral damage, all right? And then we have GMOs, all right? It's like playing Russian roulette. We really don't know the long-term impact, all right? Now, there's a big difference between hybridization and genetically modifying, right? That's what GMO stands for, genetically modifying, bioengineered, all right? There's a big difference between taking, you know, like with like and hybridizing and trying to get a trait that you want, right? Now, genetic modification is we're going to remove some of these genes, right? Maybe we want to, you know, remove the pungency of that plant, like they did with mustard greens. So they removed a gene. Well, guess what? It also removed some of the other benefits that plant offers, like some of the antioxidants. So we don't know, you know, the long-term impact. And what do they do with genetic modification? Is they're taking a part of a gene sequence from a frog and putting it in the plant, or from a salamander, right? We don't know what the long-term impact of this is. All right? And what also has done is actually encourages, who knows what Roundup Ready is? You guys know what I mean by Roundup Ready? I'm sure some of you do. That means it's been chemically or genetically modified so that when it's sprayed with Roundup, my time up? Somebody's alarm bell. Anyway, when it's sprayed with Roundup, it doesn't get killed, but all the other plants do, right? That haven't been modified to receive it, right? And you know what they're doing now? They're even making them aluminum ready. You ever hear that? They're genetically modifying some so they can resist aluminum. Why is that? We know about the spraying in the sky, right? Yeah, they're making some of these plants resistant to aluminum. Isn't that crazy? I mean, what the heck are we doing, right? Or what are they doing, right? So anyway, yeah, we don't know, and like I said earlier, genetically modification is actually, they thought, oh, we can actually reduce the pesticide. It's actually the opposite. From genetic modifications, they've actually increased the amount of pesticide usage. All right, the amount per year is going up and up and up. All right, it hasn't reduced anything. And again, like I said, the biodiversity, we're just wiping it out. Now, one beautiful thing, organic is always non-GMO. Okay? Now, non-GMO isn't necessarily organic, right? You can buy something that's non-GMO, not genetically modified, and raised by conventional means, right? But anything that's organic is automatically, by definition, non-GMO. Okay? So that's an important distinction. All right, so some of the things that we do. Organic promise. All right, very important in terms of conserving the biodiversity, improving the soil, regenerative, enhancing the soil. All right, so how's that done? Well, cover cropping, where plants are planted to cover the soil rather than being harvested. So you're adding some nutrients back into the plants using cover crop. All right, enriching that soil. Conservative tillage, not, plowing this up year after year. All right, some farmers are even doing no tillage. All right, using compost, manure, green manure to improve soil quality. You think about it for a second. We used to have 60 million bison running across the plains across the United States. 60 million of them. That's about how many cattle we have now in these confinement operations. Now imagine if we had all those animals out on the grass, right, with managed grazing. Sorry, my nose is running a little bit here. With healthy management of those grazing. All right, actually doing some good rotation, allowing those animals to leave their excrement, hoofing, and they're kind of like grass cutters, they don't go down to the ground when they eat. They snip off the top and they move on, keep moving. Now, obviously, they go down to the ground when that's all they have, and if they're not managed in moving them, right? So those animals help build that soil, right? With that managed grazing. Okay, it's pretty cool. The animal's healthier, right? The soil's healthier, right? And because the animal's healthier, we're healthier for eating it. Okay, and we'll talk about that shortly too. All right. But anyway, you look at, some of the things we do in terms of organic. All right. We encourage soil health, regenerative. All right. Increasing the fertility of that soil, increasing its ability to provide good nutrients to the plants. Okay. And we're seeing this in terms of biodiversity. If you look at the bottom line there, that line across the bottom, that's conventional farming methods. Everything above that line is an increase in the biodiversity in those environments. All right? So you have 25% more birds, almost 30% more bees, 50% more butterflies. You think about the biodiversity in those environments where they're doing organic farming, we're seeing increases. So this can be done. We can improve the richness of the ecology in those systems. All right? And providing healthier food for us. All right? And by the way, there's never been a single study, I hear this often, you can get all the nutrients you need from our food. There's never been a single study proving that. So I'm a big fan of supplementation. All right? But point being is that we definitely can improve the amount of nutrients in our food by doing regenerative organic methods. All right? We're seeing that. All right? I mentioned earlier about the CO2. Back to what I was saying earlier. I don't care about the climate change crap, all right? But CO2 is very important for that environment, that underground. We think about decomposition. You think about the life that's in that soil. Carbon dioxide is very important for what happens in those life cycles. All right? Again, providing rich nutrients to those plants. All right? So very important. All right? You see a definite increase in the biodiversity in those areas. All right. And again, what's this ultimately leading towards? Not just environmental impact, but also it's good for us. All right. Healthy soil, healthy food, much higher nutrient values across the board. All right. Things like vitamin E, vitamin K, all right. The B vitamins, calcium, phosphorus, copper. All right. Some of these are significantly higher in organic spaces. And this is being proved out more and more. And the longer they do it in those areas, right, year after year, that regenerative soil, like I said, it gets better and better and better and better. It takes a while, right, because it takes a while to regenerate that soil. And as they do it more year over year, it improves year over year. All right. So organic, very good for you. All right. Anybody know what a meta-analysis is? Okay. A meta-analysis is where they take a look at a study of studies. So here they looked at 343 studies, peer-reviewed studies, organically grown crops worth 20 to 40% higher in antioxidants and those phytonutrients. All right. So that's an analysis of a lot of different studies. So in the aggregate, they're proving it time and time again that significantly more nutrition in those plants. Oh, by the way, it also tastes better, right? Come into our store, get a nice apple, and then compare that to an apple out of your conventional market. And anybody ever ask why they have a health market in some of these grocery stores? What's that tell you about the rest of the store? Right? I had a colleague attend a convention, the grocery store market convention. And they were all patting themselves on the back because they had an initiative to move the sugary cereals out of the view of the kids and put them up higher on the shelves. That was a big pat. That was a big win, right? Crazy. All right. So anyway, organic is definitely good for you. And there's been some studies showing that within a week, eating 80% organic, they knocked off the pesticide residue in their urine by 96%. Just one. And that's not even 100% organic. All right. Now think about 96% of their urine is showing, a week later, showing a drop-off. Well, what if you didn't do that? What if you didn't choose to eat more organics? That means that pesticides in you day after day after day, right? So dropping off, eating 80% organic, you can see a significant drop-off. Now, if you ate 100% organic, even better, right? It just makes sense, right? And that study has been repeated many times now, all right? They're seeing it time and time again, seeing a drop-off. And one of the things about glyphosate, it's becoming ubiquitous. It's becoming, it's found everywhere. They're finding it in fetuses, right? It's water soluble, so they're finding it all over the place, all right? Now, not just in our produce, but also think about our animals. Our animals eating organic, all right? Eating that grass, all right, as they would naturally. Right? True story, there was a vehicle on its way to a feedlot over near Milwaukee, and the driver didn't realize it, but he was spilling the contents out on the highway, leaving a trail. It was a type of candy, popular, colorful candy. Any guesses? Close. On its way to the feedlot to feed the animals. All right? Now, it's common knowledge in farming spaces that's one way to fatten them up, right? So I did a health coaching session with a farmer here just last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago. Anyway, he told me his neighbor used to get truckloads of Snickers. In the wrapper, they would just grind it up and feed it. Not even remove it from the wrapper. And in another health coaching session, a guy told me that his neighbor had a huge pile of Raisin Bran in the bags. Okay, has to weigh exactly 16 ounces, so anything over or under 16, kicked off the line, sold to the farmers. All right, now one, you have Raisin Bran made out of wheat that's sprayed heavily with glyphosate, right? Why is it sprayed with glyphosate? To kill it off, all right? It's used as a desiccant, helps kill it off, dry it out, makes it easy to harvest. All right, so you got all that conventional wheat spray with a Roundup. Now it's made in the Raisin Bran, in the bag, feeding it to the cattle. All they do, again, they just grind it up, bag and all. All right? I mean, I get it. Farmers work hard, and it'd be a lot of work to rip open those bags, and right? So let's just grind it all up. All right? We do some really stupid stuff, don't we? All right? And again, I get it. They're hard workers, and you know, it's not necessarily a dig on them. All right? But they know that's how to fatten them up. Okay? Now you look at that animal, the conventionally raised animal. We have a big problem in America. We consume way too much omega-6 fatty acids, seed oils. Right? Very inflammatory. All right? Now if you look at the amount of omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in a conventionally raised animal, it's about 25 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Ancestrally, we used to consume about 1-to-1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3. Okay? Now, you get an animal out there grazing, grass-fed for life, pasture, truly pasture-raised, it's about 2-to-1, even closer to 1-to-1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3. Much different profile in that animal. Plus, that animal in the grass has got higher level of CoQ10. Anybody know what CoQ10 is? Coenzyme Q10, very important metabolite, creation of energy in our cells. Higher in other nutrients, right? Some of the fat-soluble nutrients, vitamin E, vitamin K, you know, very important. So, again, healthier animals, healthier soil, healthier animals, healthier us, right? It's a win-win-win, okay? All right, and again, better economy. There's been studies showing that those areas of the country that have organic hotspots, all right, you go up through, Viroqua, Wisconsin area, you go up some of these areas where they have a lot of organic farming, a lot of organics, the economy is better in those areas as well, okay, because the money typically stays local, all right, because they're, that community is raising the food, right, and selling it locally and that kind of thing. All right, so the economies are actually better. All right, Natural Grocers, we've been in this fight for decades, all right, since our founding. All right, like I said earlier, you go to a lot of other conventional stores, they may have organic in their store, right? Economics, increase in their value, right, by having that offering, all right? That's all we offer. All of our produce is 100% organic. We don't even have a chance of cross-contamination from other sources. And we push hard to our providers, hey, get those animals out on the grass. We won't allow any antibiotics. We don't allow hormones, growth hormones, all right? Animals raised humanely. All right. Chickens that are allowed to run around and be real chickens have 100 feet of space per bird in some of our providers. All right. Real chickens. All right. Instead of 10,000 birds in a building and then have a little door to a cage and they can call it cage-free. Right? It's crazy, isn't it? Instead of providing a real space for those birds to be real birds. All right? One of the things they do, and some of you may know this, one of the things they do with chicks, they take the little chick and they stick their face in a machine. All right? It grabs onto their head and it snips their beak. And then it rotates around this machine, then they get a shot, probably antibiotics, another shot, probably growth hormones, and then it drops off the backside. Now that little chick has its beak snipped. Why? Because they get aggressive when they're in those cages with 10,000 other birds. So they snip their beaks so they don't injure each other. right? It's crazy, right? So anyway, like I said, Natural Grocers, we've been committed to this since our founding, all right? We've been in the battle. We've been up against FDA for several issues. We are constantly, Organic Consumers Association, Rodale Institute, Environmental Working Group, organizations that are really concerned about how our food is raised, right? We think it's important, and we've been in that battle for many, many years, all right? So again, it's always been 100% organic, even before USDA even had such a designation, right? And we continuously advocate and support organic farming and practices and methods, all right? And helping those organizations. We do fundraisings for those organizations, all right, that support that, all right? Non-GMO. We think that's very important because, again, we don't know the long-term consequences. And we support humanely raised and sustainably sourced food sources, all wild-caught fish. All right, anybody here like salmon? Wild-caught. All right, very important. How they raise those salmon in farm-raised salmon, you'd be disgusted. All right? And what are they feeding them? Fish don't eat soybean or corn. All right? That's what they're making those pellets out of. All right? How does salmon get pink? It's algae they eat out in the wild that makes them pink, called astaxanthin, the chemical in the algae. All right? Well, guess how the salmon get pink from farm raised? They colorize it, right? They literally colorize those salmon, because if you looked at it and it's white or grayish, you wouldn't buy it. So they purposely colorize that salmon, all right, to make it eye appealing. All right, so always choose wild caught. So anyway, all of our seafood is wild caught, all right? And again, more and more is being pushed towards certifications of, because there's a new certification called regenerative organic. All right, so it's a combination. The idea behind it, your regenerative, is we're encouraging those organic growers to regenerate the soil as well, enhance that soil, because then that makes the produce healthier as well. All right? Okay, to summarize, like I said, increase the biodiversity, improve soil health, that's a big one. Cleaning up the water, all right? By the way, it was the Clean Water Act. That was all about point locations. They cleaned up a lot of those point locations, that was putting toxic chemicals into the water supply. They do nothing about farming runoff. And the Clean Water Act has no requirements or regulations over that. Okay? So anyway, clean water and air, healthier ecosystems, again, increasing the human health as well. Big part of that. Increase our nutritional value of the food, increases our nutrition as well. Getting away from the synthetic exposures. Again, because we don't know what the cocktail effect is, and if you're constantly hitting yourself with glyphosate, you're devastating your microbiome. Your intestinal tract issues are just going to happen, all right, unless you do away with that stuff, all right? And again, economics, too. More jobs in various communities, all right? So that's the why, right? Again, like I said earlier at the onset, you guys are in battles, right? And justly, right? That's why you guys were organized. That's why you formed, up against the man, right? Well, this is something that you can be involved in every decision you make in your buying, right? Every time you buy and you're making a vote, you're voting for either a healthier product or one that's unhealthy, right? I got a little saying in my office, all right? I regret taking such good care of my health, said no one ever, right? So, again, that's the message of the day. Thank you very much. All right. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So there was an article today that Monsanto lost another $2.1 billion lawsuit on Roundup. Would you like to comment why they're still in business selling Roundup?
Yeah, I wish. Well, probably because they have legislators, deep in the pocket, right? I think that's a big part of it. In fact, Iowa just passed a protection law. What was it, a week or two ago, right? That protects the protection law against being sued by somebody coming down with cancer or whatever. Yeah, that's and they're, again, back to the fight. Legislatively, the politicians got to step up and say no more. You're ruining the health of our planet and the health of our people.
Iowa's
Right.
the number 2 state in the nation with the use of Roundup.
And again, like I said earlier, it's because we grow a lot of corn and soybeans and I get it. Farmers are just trying to make a living. But how much of that land is owned by corporate or at least rented by big corporations that are doing all that? Yeah, it's a good point.
Manure runoff?
So manure runoff, well, and one of the things about, again, more biological, if you got healthy manure, and green manure coming from healthy animals. So I think the synthetic fertilizers are a heck of a lot worse than manure runoff, right? So if we can help build the soil, right, make that soil healthier so it sequesters and doing good other farming methods like, no-till and whatever, so it can retain a lot of that stuff, right? Because the runoff is occurring because of the soil is becoming dirt, right? And so if we can help that soil get it enriched where it can actually absorb more carbon dioxide and water, right? That's another thing that soil enrichment does. It actually encourages water sequestration as well. Yeah, that's a very good point. Like I said earlier, the changing of that sequence. I like to think of food as not just energy, it's information. And he makes up a very good point. Informationally, what are we telling ourselves with those gene sequences that have now been modified?
All disease processes,
Inflammation, right. I think there's 2 major causes of disease, right? Lack of nutrients and then exposures to toxicants, right? And we're experiencing both of those with, the current food supply. We're getting toxic chemicals, inputs, and we're lacking good nutrients, all right? And when it comes to autoimmune issues, is one of the most important things, and I coach a lot of people on this issue, all right? That microbiome, all right, very important. And when that microbiome is compromised, that's an intestinal tract, right? When I say the gut, I'm talking about everything from the mouth down to the exit, all right, especially in the small intestine. You look at that intestinal lining, we have a very important ecosystem in there, the bacteria, all right, the immune system, all right, and we have these what we call tight junctions. We have these gaps, these little finger-like projections that stick up, all right. That surface area of our small intestine, the surface area is massive. If you were to spread out your small intestine and flatten that out completely, all those little finger-like projections, and flatten them all out, it'd be as big as a tennis court. All right. So that surface area, very important. All right. And it has to be controlled. And if we allow things to enter into the bloodstream through that environment that go into the bloodstream that don't belong, all right, let's say we don't have good complete digestion, all right, if we get a protein entering the bloodstream, body looks at that and says, that looks pretty strange, and so it creates an antibody, goes after that protein. Well, sometimes those proteins look a lot like our own. Oh, there it is on the thyroid. Starts going after the thyroid. Oh, there it is in the joint. Starts going after joints. Rheumatoid arthritis. Autoimmune issues oftentimes stem from an intestinal tract compromised, all right? And if we can shore up that gut lining, improve that microbiome, get away from the pesticides, all right, we can possibly turn that around. Yes, sir. Well, how many lawns are being sprayed with chemicals to enhance their lawns? And how many pets are coming down with, after, doing their thing out in the yard and coming back in and licking their paws? And how many pets are coming down with cancer? We're seeing cancer in the pets going through the roof, all right? And that, of course, is not saying anything about the food they're eating. That's another issue. because the food supply for pets too. Again, pets don't eat grain, right? But that's a major one. But yeah, good point. Thank you.
I got the mic going again.
Thank you. Tom, when is Bobby Kennedy going to call you to the White House to come down?
I appreciate the compliment, but there are some people that are way more qualified than I am. But
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I'm standing on the shoulders of many others.
Yeah.
So
Have you heard of any processing plants that are talking about cattle now that are coming in and already have cancer in their systems, in their?
I would not be surprised. I haven't heard of that, but I would not be surprised one bit.
Yeah, we heard that from a friend of ours, young couple up by Strawberry Point. They take their animals up to Minnesota. They want a processor that they can trust and not get somebody else's meat, and you know the game. And so this guy was telling them that he is butchering a lot of cattle now that have the cancer cells, cancer pockets in their meat.
I wonder if that's coming from mRNA injection.
Could be, I don't know. They haven't
Not to
pursued
open
it.
up another can of worms, but
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, and the other thing is, is it possible to have organic farms when they're getting toxin and the chemicals from on top and the chemtrails coming down?
yeah.
I mean, how does that test out when you
Yeah.
test for an organic farm?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, how do you prevent that?
Yeah,
You know, a big greenhouse.
yeah, right.
It's crazy. It's crazy. But I have had people say to me, that, well, you don't even know if it's organic. They could just be, And my response always is, well, the USDA has pretty good standards, pretty high standards on the organic market space. And a lot of these people wouldn't want to risk their organic license by not being organic. And you got groups like Environmental Working Group that are testing people, all the time, right? And so if one of these organic consumer organization came on and tested your organic produce and you weren't, you're gonna lose, right? You're gonna be out. But the other question I always ask them, well, would you rather consume something that might not have any pesticides whatsoever versus one that has them? Right? I mean, it's kind of illogical. That conventional is going to have it in there. I'm going to take my chances and consume the organic. It probably doesn't. Right? And again, studies are showing that, just like I pointed out, though, 80% showing a significant reduction in pesticides in their urine. That's proof kind of in the pudding in my mind that, yeah, you can reduce this stuff.
We got a Farmer Brown here. He's a real farmer.
Yeah, I figured that.
You got anything to add?
And if there was anything off the cuff on my part, I apologize. I want to make it out of town alive.
Not really. I guess my question would be if you farm right next to an organic farmer, how does that work when you're?
Yeah, organic farmer
50
next
feet.
to a conventional. Yeah, that's another issue. I know of a guy, a winery down here across from the airport, the Barrelhead. Anybody familiar with that winery? He lost his organic farm because of the local farmer spraying Roundup, and it wiped out his crop, right? Wiped out his grapes. He had to close up his business. Now, somebody else came in and bought it, but they're not organic. They're producing wine, but it's not organic. He was very adamant about having. So yeah, that's a great question. How do you? And even Monsanto's even done that, where they've sued farmers for a patent infringement because, the one farmer was using Monsanto product and the farmer next door wasn't, and they had this, this overspray of whatever, and it's crazy.
Canada can travel 2 miles, so who are you gonna blame?
Right? Yeah, good point. But I think if in the economics, if more and more people were to step up and say, we want organic, hopefully that message, just like all the other advocacy things that you guys stand up for, the more and more people that say, and again, the organic space is growing year over year, so why does Hy-Vee have an organic section? Because they know there's a market for it. All right. Kraft bought a company called Primal Kitchen. It was 100% organic, right? And they told the owner of Primal Kitchen in that contract was, we recognize the need for this. Kraft was saying this to him. We recognize the need for this market. We see that, and we want to, start heading that direction. Because again, they know economically, if we only have 40, 50 years on a lot of our soil, we need to make some changes. They know it's not sustainable, right? So thankfully, he was able to stay on board for a couple of years as an advisory capacity, and they've maintained that integrity with that niche in their product. But yeah, there's that.
Soils lasting was a lot shorter than that timeline of 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, it was a guess on my part because I remember reading, it was a while back, it was maybe, I can't remember, it was 10, 15 years ago. Back then they were saying 60 years. So yeah, and it may even be, happening faster and faster, having a compounding effect, year over year. Maybe the erosion, whatever, is happening faster and faster. I don't know, but.
One other question. I've heard that Roundup never leaves the soil once it's put on. Have you heard that?
Well, my understanding is water soluble, so I think it does eventually disappear.
The half-life of glyphosate is 20 to 22 years.
Okay. Yeah, but, does it gradually get washed away?
It will, but with multiple applications, it's a geometric progression, and
sure.
it adds up. So if you've had a farm that's had Roundup on it, you're not going to get it completely clear of glyphosate probably for
Take a
20
long
to
time.
22 years.
Right. Yeah, and it's a heavy metal chelator too, so it binds
Exactly.
to, yeah.
They used to use it for cleaning out metal pipes.
Yeah, that's how they discovered it. They used it for cleaning out pipes, and it ran off and killed all those weeds. Hey, we could use that as a weed killer. That's a good. I would search online. I bet there's got to be some tests out there available. I would think. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Don Huber?
No.
He was at Purdue University and worked for the USDA and was instrumental in developing Roundup. And I have seen him at meetings get up and cry like a baby for what he's done to the human population. He knows what it does.
Right. Well, and this is very eye-opening. Yeah. Let's pray for Mr. Huber.
Tell us about your store and what's all in it, and
Well, we are basically a full grocery store. Like I said earlier, 100% organic on all the produce, all the meats. We have very high standards on where that meat comes from, whether it's beef, chicken, turkey, fish. Like I said, it's all wild caught, pasture raised, free range, truly. We got the largest offerings of supplements in the city. I'm a big fan of supplementation as needed. I always say, eat your food, supplement the rest. Right? I think supplementation is very important because, like I said earlier, there's never been a study proving that you can maximize, get optimal nutrition from your diet. All right? There's usually something that could be lacking. 75% of us don't get enough magnesium. All right? Why is that? Again, we don't fertilize the ground with magnesium? Or does the plants get it from? All right. About 75% of us don't have enough vitamin D, especially at this latitude. All right. You can go out there a nice sunny day this time of year, and between the scale of 0 and 12, your likelihood of producing vitamin D is about 2 or 3 on that scale, even without any clothes on. Okay? All right? So I think vitamin D supplementation is very important.
Any comment?
She goes into that. Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, what is it doing to the, the microbiome and to the nerve structure and whatnot? There's a lot of potential negative side effects on all that stuff. And of course, and hopefully Kennedy will do something about that. I also believe that the vaccine schedule has an impact on that.
Is that book available in your store?
Yes, I think I have 2 copies. And this is one of them. But we always can get more. Our vaccines implication, in that autism issue, and I believe it is. That's my opinion. I'm not a doctor.
Dr. Albrecht down at University of Missouri in Columbia was an agronomist, and he said that if we fed our soil right, our livestock would be healthier, and the dean of the veterinary school got him fired. That's a true story.
I don't doubt it. I do not doubt it one bit. Good question. I think there are definitely some things you can do to kind of turn the tide a little bit. Absolutely. No, if I was a kid, I had fatty liver, I'd probably have some time to clear that out. All right. Choline. I mentioned acetylcholine earlier regarding the brain. Choline is also very important for liver health. But yeah, there are some things you can do, to help kind of turn things around if somebody has a fatty liver. All right. Very important to minimize the negative inputs. All right. Sugar, fructose, high fructose corn syrup. How many people are drinking sodas? Anybody? How about that ketchup that has high fructose corn syrup? All right. Fructose, yep, increases uric acid. Why do bears eat a lot of fruit before winter? Ramps up the uric acid, causes fat storage for the bear. What's it doing to humans? Causing fat storage. Fructose can't be... So fructose takes a different pathway in the body. All right, glucose for sugars, for energy, right? Now, if the cells have enough energy, or insulin doesn't work as well, all right, maybe we're insulin resistant a little bit, all right, what happens to that excess sugar? All right, it's got to be taken somewhere, all right? Fructose doesn't get burned in the body like glucose does. It's got to be processed by the liver, so it drives up that storage in the liver. All right. There are some things you can do. One of the most important things you can do, obviously, is modify the diet. Exercise. The greatest sugar sink, you know what I mean by that? Sugar sink. All right. Greatest storage area in the body for glucose? Muscles. All right. And if our cells are receptive to that insulin signal, all right, you can pull that sugar in and use it, create muscle glycogen. We use it up. If the muscles aren't active, the muscles aren't moving a lot, all right, they probably have enough sugar in them and they're going to say, well, we don't need any more. So what's it going to take it? It's going to send it off to get deposited elsewhere. Stored. Insulin is a storage hormone. It's its main function, to store things away. And when there's a lot of insulin being produced in the body, all right, unless you're type 1 diabetic, all right, inability to produce insulin, all right, it's storing whatever it doesn't need at the moment, okay? And the body likes to, with that insulin production, it likes to store things, okay? It likes to put it away. Yes?
What's the most popular item of food you sell in your store?
Or water.
Water.
Yeah, it's true. Well, we sell reverse osmosis water, just in terms of unit sales, right? When people come in and they buy 20 gallons at a time, or 30 or 40, right? But no, our produce is very popular. You know, you walk in the store and the first thing you see is our produce on the right-hand side. So we sell a lot of produce, right? That's very popular. Our nut supply is very popular. Again, all non-GMO. And then we sell a lot of the other, frozen veggies and a lot of fruit, right? We have some cereals, lots of different options there. Baking goods, and we do a lot of supplements as well.
Sell a lot of apricot seeds.
Yeah, I wish. I wish we could sell apricot seeds.
Yeah, I did.
Well, a good question. Maybe I'll have to see if the company can get them. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, get some of that Laetrile.
I have a question. What is like omeprazole? What is that doing to your gut? If you take omeprazole or any kind of antacid product.
Well, first off, the stomach acid needs to be produced. Now, without any food in your stomach, your acid levels are like 3.5. When you eat, that stomach acid should drop to about 1.5. If you know the pH scale, 7 is neutral. 1.5 is pretty acidic. It's almost battery acid level. That'd burn a hole right through your hand. That's how acidic it should get in a healthy gut, all right? Because it's that signal, that stomach acid, that sends a signal to the esophageal sphincter to close tightly, right? It's the acid that sends the signal, close tight, all right? Now, if somebody has been, over years, had reflux, and they may have lost that inability to for that signal to occur correctly. But in a healthy adult, that acid should reach 1.5 and send the signal, close tightly. All right? So using a product that inhibits body's natural production of our digestive juices just doesn't make sense. And we have other proton pumps throughout the body. So if you're taking a proton pump inhibitor, all right, what's it doing elsewhere? And they know that those things are only supposed to be taken for what, 2 weeks? Right? I know people that have been on for years, and you're sacrificing nutrient absorption. There's other issues that downstream for this. You're not getting all, if you're not digesting the food properly, right, then you're also not going to get the nutrients either properly. And that acid also has an involvement in controlling of that microbiome, right? So, yeah, I encourage folks, there's a product that has, it's called betaine HCl, hydrochloride. Very important for production of stomach acid. Salt, real salt. I'm talking about like Redmond's real salt, or Celtic sea salt, or Himalayan sea salt. One thing about Himalayan sea salt is there's a lot of bad sources out there coming out of China, because they don't care about how it's processed, and they go in and dig it out of the ground, and they invariably pull out some of the other, rock and whatever. They don't have the best control, so because they don't care, Some companies, very important, they monitor that very closely. And Redmond's real salt, by the way, is mined out of Utah, underground, and they use hand harvesting and very clean, no microplastics found in the salt. That's another issue, the microplastics, right? All right, in a single liter of water, they found in the plastic bottle 240,000 microplastics in a single liter of water. All right? What was that betaine? Betaine, HCl. All right? You know, and you think about it too, you know, what they list all this low salt, no salt. Okay? Well, that's driving lack of stomach acid production, by the way. All right? Healthy salt. All right, real good book out there called The Salt Fix. Dr. D. Nicolantonio looks at he did a deep dive into the whole salt thing. And his subtitle is Why the Experts Have It All Wrong and Why Eating More Might Save Your Life. All right. Anybody know how much salt is in the saline solution if you ever get hospitalized and they hook the saline solution up to you? Anybody know how much is in that?
0.9%.
9 grams. 9,000 milligrams in one of those single bags of saline. All right, why do the American Medical Association say, oh, you should only be consuming 1.5 to 3, thousand milligrams a day? Yet in one of those bags they have 9 grams. That's a lot. All right. And Dr. D. Antonio does a deep dive into that. He recommends we need salt. Because that salt, hydrochloric acid, chloride, where do we get that chloride? From healthy salt. And those salts, by the way, that I mentioned have between 60 and 90 trace minerals. A lot of minerals in it. It's not just sodium chloride. And typically in that, I don't want to indict anybody here, but in that little bottle on your table, anti-caking ingredients in there, dextrose, right? Bleached. It's not much in there in terms of nutritional value. Or it's a real salt.
How many grams of protein should we consume every day?
Good question. It depends on a couple things. Depends on your goals. Is it weight loss? Is it weight management? Is it to put on muscle? Right? And it's individualized based on what you weigh. Right? So I can't necessarily say, kind of a pat answer. It depends on a couple of different things. And activity is important. Lifestyle is important. And what are your health goals? Most of us don't get enough protein.
Generally speaking, for the average person.
So take your body weight in pounds, divided by 2.2. That'll give you your kilograms. And then you should probably get at least 1 gram per kilogram. Right? At least 1 per kilogram. Now, that's, again, depending on the person. Right? Depending on your activity. Right? Weight management wise, if I was somebody wanting to lose a little bit, that's where I'd be at, 1 to 1.5. If I wanted to maintain, I might shoot for 1.5 to 2 grams. If I was trying to gain, put on muscle, I might shoot it up to 2.5 grams per kilogram. So it depends on, a lot of factors there. All right. So just a reminder, I got some of those health hotlines there, the magazine at the end of the table. Anybody didn't get a... Oh, yes. You got a question?
Yeah, I'm not a big-time farmer, but I've used Roundup already, but I found that a mixture of vinegar, salt, and a little soap does just as good a job.
Right.
As your Roundup. It's a little more potent vinegar, than your house vinegar.
Right.
I usually get it at Lowe's.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
It works good. It works good in the garden and around the yard.
Oh, sure. Yeah. As a health coach, and we do this at no charge. Basically, what we do is, if anybody wants an appointment, want to make some modifications to their health, and be glad to help out. Basically, you just call the store, ask for me, and we'll set up a time. And what I do is we sit down and talk about your current situation. I believe in what we call bio-individuality. Okay? Granted, we all need to eat healthy. We all need magnesium. We all need vitamin D. But there's a difference between each and every one of us in here based on your history, your circumstance, and what your goals are. So what I do is we sit down and talk about those things. What are your current habits? What's your current situation? What are you currently consuming? All right, and then I give you some idea. How's your sleep? You know, all that kind of stuff. So we talk about a lot of things. All right, and we plan for about an hour to have that conversation. All right, and we can do follow-up sessions as well. Okay, and again, we do not charge for that. All right, it's one of my joys of the job is helping people. All right, I love it when I have a customer come in and say, "Hey, I'm off my medication. I feel so much better, thank you." All right, no, it's very rewarding when that happens. All right, and I enjoy doing it.
Organic.
Yeah, I would encourage somebody in that situation I would have them reach out to Rodale Institute and look down a different path. You know, maybe go into the organic market space, and because that's growing, there's going to be a need for it, and maybe do a conversion into regenerative organic, and you know, go a different market. That's an idea. I don't know.
But the way it's designed now is you gotta grow as much as you possibly can, or you're gonna go broke.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and like I said, unplug from that matrix and maybe plug into a different, you know, system. You know, I've heard it before. Can organic feed the world? Organic can't feed. You know how much food we throw away in America? Yeah, about 40%. You know, our landfills, 25% of it is produce over the years. I think if we were able to convert that into ability to get it back into the soil, you know, a composting situation, whatever, if we were able to get that back in the soil, make a huge difference.
What happens if I tell you my wife has got 14 prescriptions?
Well, sorry to hear that, but at the same time, maybe we can do some things. Why are, 14 is pretty significant. Some of them are for offsetting the side effects of others, right?
Yes.
You know, that's a big part of it. You know, my encouragement there would be work on improving the individual health as much as possible from a natural standpoint, and potentially maybe gradually wean off some of that stuff,
Good.
right? Good. I don't ever tell anybody to get off their drugs. That's not my position, right? But I do try to help them change.
We got another question here.
Yes.
How do you know what the perfect diet is? There's so many conflicting information out there.
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the amazing things about the human body. It can survive on many different options. There's ketogenic, there's carnivore, Now, I don't ever advocate anybody go vegan. I think that's completely wrong, all right? Because I think we do need animal-based foods, all right?
What about grain-free, dairy-free?
One of the issues with grain is, again, back to how it's been modified. It's hybridized back in the 70s. We made that wheat so big that they even had to modify the height of the plant.
But do you have to worry about that when it comes to organic?
Yeah, good question. I think wheat depends on where it's grown and how it's grown. I know people that have gone to Europe and they don't have any issue with the breads over there. They come back to the United States and then they, suffering again. So, but I do think that everybody has an inflammatory response to wheat, whether they know it or not, right? And the main reason is, again, because of the hybridization. We've modified the protein in there. It's called gliadin, right? Gluten, right? Right? All your grains have gluten in them. So it's just a binding protein, right? But gliadin is one in particular that's in wheat, rye, and barley, and that's been shown to be problematic, all right? So I don't eat a lot of grain myself, and I think it's something that people have to individually, work with themselves, right? Elimination diet, if they feel better and better, all right? And then they reintroduce one food at a time to see how their body responds to it. They can determine whether that's, good for them or not, right? So it's so individual, right? And like I said earlier, the human body's amazing. I know people on the carnivore diet and they do fantastic. I know people on keto doing fantastic. It's not for everybody, but depending on the person and how, it can happen, yes.
Do I have another question? Oh, boy. This ought to be good.
Thank you. When you consider going to just a regular medical doctor, and maybe you have some kind of imbalance in your diet, and then they refer you to a nutritionist, okay, how much faith can you put in a nutritionist to provide viable information of what you really need to be eating versus like the organic path and some of these other paths that we've talked about, the supplemental meds and all that? I mean, can you really trust a nutritionist to take you down a clear and straightforward path?
Good question. The first thing I'd ask that nutritionist is I would ask, well, what do you think about, the conventional food in the store here? What kind of advice are you getting from them from a diet standpoint? Do they just say, oh, eat everything in moderation? Some of the questions you can ask them to kind of find out where they're coming from a general standpoint. If they say, oh, yeah, you can eat anything out of our store, but yeah, you need to cut out this or cut out that, follow the RDA guidelines, right? I would be very, if I would have gone down the registered dietitian route, I would have probably lost my license many times. Reason being is I don't follow their paradigm because I think they're wrong. You look at the food pyramid, right? It should be turned on its head, right? That whole grain-based thing. I don't know if you guys know anything about Kellogg, but the guy was a wacko. Right? All right. Got America eating grains as the foundation for our food supply. No, there's a lot of problems with what that.
Last question here.
Has happened. But I appreciate your question there. And again, it would depend on where are they coming from? Are they coming from the standard American model? Follow the SAD? You know what I mean by the SAD? Standard American diet. It's sad, right? If they follow down that path, I would say I'm out of here. I'd be going elsewhere.
If you use your common sense and stay away from processed foods, will that eliminate all of your problems or most of the problems?
That is an excellent start. Yes, excellent start. All right. Just one real quick thing about that. Just to give an example about the processed food. How many people here like Chick-fil-A? Eat at Chick-fil-A? Chick-fil-A sandwich, 50 ingredients, 40 of which are man-made. So, by the way, when that was revealed, they used to have their ingredient list on the website. When it was revealed, oh, we better get that off of there. All right?
Talking chicken sandwiches?
They're standard Chick-fil-A sandwich.
Let's give Tom a round of applause.
Thank you. No applause, just throw money.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.